Hello everybody, welcome to the Thursday Lunch Bar at Wonder.
Yay!
I'm James.
I'm Jess.
And it is so great to see you here in the Wonder tent today. Wonder, this is a week run by the Christian Union discussing some of the big questions in life. So if you're continuing to grab your soup, please do then come and grab a seat here at the front.
Great, so today we're going to be thinking about how can I make sense of all the suffering, and Emma's going to come up and talk to us about it. So Emma, do you want to come up? And do you want to say a few words about yourself? Who are you? Why are you here?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. My name's Emma. I am based in Cambridge. I work for a Christian charity which basically is helping undergraduate students, like lots of you guys, think through some of the big questions about life and faith, and science particularly is my kind of specialism in that. I did a degree in biochemistry back in the day. Yeah, anything else you want to know?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of some of the... We've had some interesting questions so far this week.
Oh, they can if they want to. Anyone want to know any facts? Favourite pizza? One with like a sweet chili or barbecue base. Like non-traditional, I think. That's my answer to that.
Well, Emma, these are some big questions that I think we all have questions about. So we're excited to hear what you've got to say.
Great. Thanks, James. Thanks, Jess. Thanks so much for coming this lunchtime to join me as we think about this question of suffering. This is a painful topic, isn't it? Perhaps more so for some of us in the room right now than others. And I just want to acknowledge before we even get started that it is totally okay to find the stuff we're going to talk about today hard. If at any point you're finding it all a bit much and you just want to go out and get some air, that is so okay. Take a friend with you, someone you can process with and talk with. But it's okay if some of this stuff is going to be heavy. Here we go. This is a photo from my summer holiday in France this year. On the last day of our trip, my husband and I took our car up to the north coast of Normandy to spend the day at the beach. And this is the beach we went to. It was totally beautiful, like golden sand stretching as far as you can see in either direction. Beautiful sun, 25 degrees. We ate ice cream, we paddled, we sunbathed. It was the perfect holiday day. But we didn't just visit this beach for the sunshine. This photo was taken at the same beach on 6th of June 1944, also known as D-Day. On D-Day, American troops fought their way up Omaha Beach under heavy German fire to begin the work of liberating Nazi-occupied France. Here's how one witness described the scene. As I painfully walked back to the beach, thousands of parts of bodies lined it. There were floating heads, arms, legs. On that one day, it's estimated that 5,000 servicemen died on Omaha Beach. Nearly 80 years later, it's a beautiful holiday destination. Omaha Beach is just one example of the bizarre tension that afflicts the world that we live in. On the same planet that gave us the Amazon rainforest and the taste of strawberries and the joy of laughter, 682 million people live in extreme poverty. 50 million people are subject to some kind of modern-day slavery. Joy and pain, beauty and suffering exist side by side in our world. And that tension is true in our own lives as well, isn't it? Perhaps we have quite a happy, sunshiny, smiley view of the world until one day suffering comes crashing into our life. A bereavement, a diagnosis, a breakup, a mental health crisis. For me, I think perhaps for many of us, the COVID pandemic was the thing that really brought me face to face with the reality of suffering. I had COVID in April 2020 in that first wave when no one really knew what it was. And I remember being so terrified, stuck in my house on my own because my housemates couldn't come back because I was ill, watching the news every day, seeing the death count climb up, the number of people in hospital increases. That idea that the world was a smiley, happy, sunshiny place was shattered for me. For some among us, there will be something that has happened in your life very recently that has brought you face to face with suffering. Perhaps you're still trying to figure out how you can possibly pick yourself up again and pretend that life is normal when it feels like nothing will ever be normal again. if that hasn't happened to you in your life yet, if you've not had that experience, it will do. Suffering comes for all of us in the end. So if we're going to survive in this world with its complicated mix of beauty and pain, we're going to have to figure out a way to make sense of suffering. We need to know how it fits into the bigger picture. Is there ultimately meaning in our pain? Or is it all just random, meaningless? This lunchtime, we're going to explore whether a Christian view of reality might help us make sense of suffering. I don't want to pretend there are easy answers to the question of suffering, because there aren't. There is a degree of mystery about suffering that no amount of philosophizing is going to be able to shake. But here's my basic thesis this afternoon. Christianity does not remove the problem of suffering. But if you don't believe in the Christian God, you have a bigger problem with suffering than if you do. I'll repeat that. Christianity doesn't remove the problem of suffering. But if you don't believe in the Christian God, you have a bigger problem with suffering than if you do. Now, let's begin to unpack that together. For many people in the world, and perhaps for some of us in the room today, suffering is the reason that you can't bring yourself to believe in God. How can there be a God, you might say, when so many people's lives, mine included, are so awful? That's a question that plagues many Christians too, and we're going to come back to it. But first, we're going to examine the flip side. If God doesn't exist, what is suffering? Here's how famous atheist Richard Dawkins put it. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good. Nothing but pitiless indifference. In other words, if there is no God and the physical stuff of this universe is all there is, then suffering is just bad luck. In the fight for survival, there are winners and there are losers. Suffering doesn't mean anything, it's just random. What does our pain matter if all we are is a load of molecules moving around at random? Now, at first glance, this way of thinking about suffering might seem to some of us quite appealing. It could be quite freeing to think that in the end, none of it matters. That's the view taken by a school of thought called optimistic nihilism. Buddhism takes a kind of similar approach to suffering, that ultimately suffering is an illusion that can be overcome if we can just learn to let go of our attachments. Optimistic nihilism and Buddhism both offer us a way to cope with suffering by accepting that it doesn't matter. Alternatively, karma explains suffering by saying that the universe causes bad things to happen to bad people. If it's not obvious what someone did to deserve a certain instance of suffering, then it must have been in a previous life. But we look at these three options, and I'm just not sure that any of them hold up in the face of real suffering. This is a photo from a very different trip that I took this year. Some of you might know who this is. This is the former Nazi concentration camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland. Between 1941 and 1944, an estimated 1 million men, women and children, mostly Jewish people, were murdered there. It's a really hard place to visit, a really moving place to visit. But there was one bit that particularly got to me on this trip. The tour takes you through one of these prison blocks, and they have various different artifacts that belonged to the people who were murdered there. You go down this long corridor filled with glass cases of shoes discovered by the Soviet guards who found them when they liberated the camp in 1945. And you go down this corridor full of shoes, you turn into the next room, and this is what you see. They're children's shoes. I find it hard even to look at this photo. I can't imagine the kind of suffering that the children who own these shoes went through. And the question is, did that suffering matter? Was it wrong? Or was it just bad luck in the fight for survival? Was their suffering an illusion that they should just learn to let go of? Or perhaps it was bad karma? I don't know about you, but when I see that picture, everything within me screams that that suffering mattered, that those children mattered. What the Nazis did to them was truly evil. And I suspect most of us in the room would agree that those lives cut short deserve more than just a shrug of our shoulders. But the thing is, to call anything evil, you have to have a transcendent definition of the good. Dawkins himself acknowledges that. To say that their suffering is wrong, that it matters not just to me, but it matters objectively, you have to have God in the picture. The Bible tells the story of reality in which suffering is not just an unfortunate aspect of life that we have to accept and to live with. Suffering, according to the Bible, is not original. It's something that has gone wrong with our world that needs to be put right. Or, to put it more accurately, it's a symptom of something that's gone wrong with our world and needs to be put right. The Bible tells us that we live in a world that is in rebellion against its creator. God made this beautiful world with humans in all our delightful diversity to live in harmony with him and with each other. But that harmony is broken by our selfish and destructive behavior. We've rejected our good creator who intended us to live following his good and life-giving pattern for our lives. I mean, if we break it down, how much suffering, even that which is we consider natural, is at some level a result of people chasing what they want at the expense of other people's well-being? How much suffering in the world, if we're honest, are we actually complicit in? Now, what I'm absolutely not saying is that we can always identify someone to blame for a particular instance of suffering. The fact that my mum has suffered from depression and chronic pain for most of her adult life is not because she or anyone else did anything particularly wrong. Please don't hear me say that you or someone you love are responsible for the way that you are suffering right now. But we live in a world that is struggling with the consequences of being out of harmony with its creator. Now, we're going to see shortly that God is doing something about that. But first, I thought this was a good moment just to pause and to take some of that in and to reflect. You'll have found on your chairs as you came in and also up on the screen. There are a couple of questions just at the top. Why don't we take a couple of minutes now, turn to the person next to you, say hi, introduce yourself if you don't know them, and just spend a couple of minutes answering those questions. What different strategies for coping with suffering have you witnessed in people around you? And do you think having some kind of faith makes a difference? Okay, I'm going to cut into those conversations there. I hope you found that discussion helpful. So far, we've noted that we live in a world which is this messy mix of beauty and pain. We've seen that the Bible puts this down to us being in rebellion against our Creator, being out of harmony with Him. But while that might give us an explanation for suffering, I'm not sure it's very comforting, is it? Because what we need most of the time when we experience suffering is not actually philosophical answers. Like most of the time, it's not even a quick fix to our problem that we need. As humans, our first need when we suffer is empathy. More than we need to understand, we need to be understood. Now, I got married in 2022, and it's taken my husband a bit of a while to learn this. When I'm upset about something, his instinct is to try and make things better. He wants to fix stuff. I can be like on the sofa crying about how stressed I am, and his first instinct is to go do the washing up. And it's taken me a while to teach him that actually what I need in that moment most is not him to go and fix everything for me right now. I need a hug. I need him to come and talk to me, and for him to listen. I need to feel that my pain is understood. I said earlier that God is doing something about human suffering. Now, God's response to suffering is surprising. It's not what we would expect, but it is so brilliant just because what I've said about what we need most when we suffer. God sees human suffering and He comes to join us in it. The prophet Isaiah, writing in the Old Testament 700 years before Jesus, predicted a time when God Himself was going to show up as a human to come and lead His people. But listen to how this person is described. This is on the grey box on your sheets if you want to follow. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on Him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Just feel the shock of that for a minute. God, the one being in the universe who is not able to suffer, was going to take on a human body to become a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. 700 years on from Isaiah's prophecy, the one to whom it pointed was born in Bethlehem. When God came to earth as the man Jesus, He didn't come to live a life of luxury. He came to share in our pain and suffering. If you read one of the Gospels, the accounts of Jesus' life, you'll see that Jesus' life was not an easy one. He was frequently tired and hungry. He didn't have a permanent home for a long time. He was hated by the religious rulers. And ultimately, he was arrested, tortured, and executed by the most brutal method available at the time, crucifixion. Now, why does this matter? We know, don't we, that suffering can be isolating. I'm sure most of us know that crushing feeling when you're hurting and no one else knows and no one else gets it. That's why when you're going through something hard, it's so helpful to spend time with people who've been through the same thing. They get you. Well, when it comes to suffering, Jesus gets you. He knows exactly what it's like to suffer physical pain and emotional trauma. If you have ever felt like your soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, so has Jesus. I can pray to Him in the midst of my suffering, and I know that He absolutely gets it, and He loves me through it. I said earlier that a common reason people dismiss Christianity is the thought that there can't possibly be a God when there is so much suffering in the world. And I think what people really mean when they ask that question is, how can God allow me and people I love to suffer while He stays so far removed from it all? But God has not stayed far removed from suffering. He, by choice, has plunged right into the depths of suffering, to the point of death even. When you suffer, it does not mean that God has abandoned you. Suffering is actually where God comes closest to us. But empathy isn't all we need when we suffer, is it? In the end, we need a solution to our suffering. Take a look at these next few lines from Isaiah with me. Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. Jesus came to suffer not just with us, but for us. He was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. The problem with our world is that we are in rebellion against God. And what does any sensible ruler do with a rebellion? You crush it, right? When riots broke out in Cape Town last August over a taxi driver strike and left 5 people dead, the government quickly crashed down to quash the rebellion and prevent further violence. Harmony was restored. But Isaiah speaks of Jesus being crushed for our rebellion. God chose to deal with the problem of suffering, not by crushing us, but by offering himself up to be crushed in our place. The reason for Jesus' suffering is to put an end to suffering. He came to die in our place, to suffer on our behalf, to restore harmony between us and our Creator. Now, if Jesus, having died, had stayed dead, then that healing would just be theoretical, wouldn't it? We might have some comfort in our suffering, but no hope to an end of it. But Jesus did not stay dead. Incredibly, and you can ask me more about this later if you want to, the Gospels record that Jesus, 3 days after his death, rose again from the grave, returned to heaven, and promised that one day he's going to return to end pain and suffering. There is hope that beyond this messy, mixed up world, there is another one coming, where the best bits of life now will shine even brighter, and the worst bits, cancer, wars, abuse, poverty, will not be there anymore. Not only that, but justice will have been done. The perpetrators of evil who murdered those children in Auschwitz will get their due reward. I don't know about you, but this gives me immense hope in the face of suffering now, both my own and that of others. Suffering is a thread in the big story of reality, yes, but it is not the end. Now, does this answer all our questions about suffering? No. It doesn't tell me why those 5,000 men died on Omaha Beach on Dean Day, nor does it tell me why my mum struggles with depression but my dad doesn't. But if God is bigger than we are, then it's just possible that he has reasons that we don't understand. As I heard a friend of mine put it once, if God is big enough to blame for suffering, he might just be big enough to know something about it that we don't. And if Jesus loves me enough to choose to suffer with me and for me, then I think I can trust him with the bits that I don't understand. But I actually want to end on a note of, I guess, what you might call warning. Because if restoring harmony between us and God means crushing rebellion, and it does, then don't let yourself be the person who remains in rebellion against God. The offer of healing in Jesus, of a restored world with no suffering and pain, is open to everyone, but it won't be given to those who decide they don't want it. I know that lots of us in the room will be at a point where you're kind of figuring out what you think about Jesus, and that is perfectly okay. Take your time doing that. But don't sit on the fence forever. What's at stake here is not just a way of understanding the suffering in the world, but an eternal hope for life without suffering in a perfect world. The stakes are too high to just sit on the fence. We're going to have another time for some discussion now. So there are a couple more questions that you might want to talk through on your sheet and up on the screen. What difference would it make to you personally to know that God had chosen to suffer with you and for you? And what do you think a world without suffering would be like to live in? After what you've heard today, do you have any hope that it will happen? Have some time just to discuss, and then our hosts will be back up to lead us on to the next part of our lunchtime.